Sure. What I do is I aggregate changes in language over time from rather mundane kind of forums. So I would have my software go out and read a forum about gardening week after week after week and check for changes in the language. My operating theory is that all humans are psychic. Most of us don't react to our psychic impressions, but it leaks out of us anyway, and it shows up in those places where we go most frequent, and we're not really paying attention to what's going on. And what happens is that you're having the same kind of conversations you had with your Aunt Maud 3 weeks ago, talking about the same sort of things, but for whatever reason you reach for a different word set. And it's my operating premise that the reason that you reach for that other word set is because of a psychic impression that wants to get out of you, so to speak, and my software gathers up those changes. We aggregate it into a thick, syrupy mass, and I put a stick in it and pull out prescient bits of future language, not future events, and there's a key difference. So I get hints of a language showing up in the future, not the event itself. So if we all decided to suddenly start talking about the sun turning purple, 7 months from now, my data might show it next month. But it wouldn't be an event. It would just be that everybody on the planet, for whatever reason, decided to talk about the sun turning purple. Sort of make sense?
Well, that's very advanced for a lot of people. Could we just kind of, would it be similar to trending?
It would be a very advanced form of trending, built out of deep data mining is what they call it.
Yeah, okay. Well, for some people who don't understand the techie side, if they know trending, like what's on Twitter, when people say what's trending on Twitter, it's what people are talking about most important in that order. And I know that kind of simplifies it, but for people who don't understand the technology, I think that's probably the best way to describe it, would you say?
I would say that is indeed the case, but I would put a caveat these days because any social media you go to, that trending list is a controlled item. It is not truly what is trending. It is what they want you to think is trending. And my software doesn't work that way. It actually gets what's really on people's minds, not what the organization wants you to think is on their minds.
Okay. Now, obviously, you do your regular newsletter that you send out. People can subscribe to that, and I know you do a number of videos. With everything that's going on at the moment, we're in this kind of, I'm going to call it chasm, where some people are kind of losing their marbles because there's so much going on. And we'll probably be bouncing around the subjects because there's so much to talk about. But what's the top 5 things that you've come across that are on the radar at the moment?
Globally, we would be looking at, we can encapsulate it in just a few words. Populism, economics, weather, the future, independent of those previous ones, and space aliens.
Okay. Well, let's go through each one of them. Can we do that?
Sure.
Okay.
So, the populism part here is being expressed in the Western societies, less so in China, although they always have that going on, and far less so in Russia. But the populism is coming out as an eruption of an organic emotional trend within people that's been suppressed, massaged, and beat on since World War II. So my premise here is that since World War II and the displaced persons era that followed that, the power elite have been trying to shove us into larger and larger and larger organizations. But at that point, our humanity was just basically exhausted, and we all wanted to go haul ourselves back to our local tribe and lick our wounds and recover for a while, and that has been suppressed, and that's what's coming out in the form of the populism now. And so, in my view, especially from my data sets, what's been going on in the whole of the Western world, not just the here in the United States, but we are the pinnacle of it and the most public face of it most recently. But what's been going on has been a war between two factions of what we can call the deep state. And the deep state is in all countries, and it supports the ruling elites. And what's been going on is a schism in that deep state that is facing the reality of what is pending for humanity. And there's been a war there, and we saw Donald Trump as the face of it. We saw Brexit as the face of it. We'll see Marine Le Pen. We'll see dozens of changes here over these next few months as that faction continues to win new battles and consolidate power. And so you were referencing earlier the arrogance of the media here in the United States, and basically how dare they try and insist that the president do this, that, and the other thing, and the roles are reversed, but not in their minds, not in the minds of the media, because that part of the media is what I call the corporate or captive media, and they are merely expressing the continuation of that war that is going on. So unlike all previous elections, it was not settled here in these United States with the election per se, and now the real battles are ongoing, and we're seeing the collateral damage as well as the specific damage come out. So we've had thousands of arrests ongoing in these United States since Trump took office, and these arrests are entirely criminal, not political, but they have huge political ramifications because these criminals that are being arrested are pedophiles, and it was through pedophilia as a blackmailing vice that our country was hijacked a number of decades ago, and that's all unraveling. But it wasn't just our country, because we're tied in with Ireland, Australia, UK, all of Western Europe through the deep state that is all trying to hide the interaction of humanity and space aliens, fundamentally.
Okay.
So see, it's all intertied. No matter where you push your hand into this particular bit of dough, it's all going to come out with that particular flavor, but it's all one big doughy mass.
Okay. Next one.
Well, we can look at economics and weather because they're combined.
Okay.
It's actually all combined, okay? But economics globally, here's fundamentally what has happened was that we had a gold-backed system that broke down after World War II during that same period of time as the elitists tried to engineer things. Had they left us alone, we would not be in this situation now. We would have maintained a steady global economy based around a precious metal system, but it didn't work that way. We had the breakdown. We ultimately had Nixon go off the gold standard in the early 70s, get us onto the reserve standard, which now is a paper debt-based system that everybody says has value and assets. So I will kid you not, the largest single asset, and I put that word in quotes, on the United States federal government's books as an asset is not in any of the land or anything here in the United States, nor even the population, but rather student debt. They claim that as an asset. So it's that skewed. And what's happening is everything that could have debt put on it has had debt put on it. And as that was a global Ponzi scheme, and Russia and China, Indonesia have all opted out of it, there's no way for us to grow, and therefore the Ponzi scheme is collapsing. And that's why we're in this economic malaise. Of course, it's contributed to by all of the factors that affected the populism, and it's also contributed to by all of the factors that are destroying the weather, because all these things are interrelated. So the weather, for instance, we can go on and say that you are eating a very expensive veg this year simply because this was the year that the Faction B, which is what I call the winning side in our deep state. Faction B has won. They started their winning last, even earlier than that, let's say March or April, and they were able to get this thing turned off. The thing is whatever the device was used to create it. I have no way of knowing what that is, but this thing had been turned on, and it created a giant mass of hot water off the Pacific Ocean of the United States and has been holding it there for the better part of these last 8 years, longer actually from its early nascent days. And so we've had this horrific drought along the west coast of the United States that was basically artificially constructed by this thing that was called the blob. That was how the meteorologists referred to it because they couldn't understand it. They also described it as natural and tried to find all kinds of explanations as to what it was. Well, it stopped last year, and as a result of it stopping, the planetary weather across the northern hemisphere has changed.
Can I just jump in there? Are you
Sure.
referring to HARP technology?
that puts a cause onto it. I don't know that it was HAARP that actually caused it. Maybe indeed that was one of the mechanisms that they used to cause the blob, but the blob was their goal. That was what they were doing. So if they used little kitty bubblegum ray guns to do it, it's immaterial. They stood out there and focused it on this part of the ocean in order to create this blob. And then they created Son of Blob off of Alaska in their last attempt. Then they were put down at some level within the deep state. There were some indications in the language of this as early as March or so of last year. And then the blob was shut off, and then the weather changed. California is becoming flooded. The West Coast here in the United States, our weather is returning to, it's snapping back, so it's not going normal. We're catching up to what should have occurred anyway. As a result of the blob going away, all of the northern hemisphere has been affected. So all of your weather was affected, Spain was inundated, and the freezing and all of these kind of things were allowed to occur. So basically what occurred at a very fundamental level was that the global warmists lost. The mechanisms by which they were creating the drought and the warming across the northern hemisphere was this some energetic form that caused the blob, and it's gone away and is going away, and now the weather is snapping back into those patterns that were predictable and expected. And so this is quite the shock, because it's very much as though piercing through a barrier from a sauna suddenly into an ice age, because that's truly what we face, is an ice age.
That's what we've been told. We had a weather expert on the show last year, and he did come on and say that we are going into an ice age. So all the kind of climate change, people shouting and screaming and saying that we're warming up, he said, no, we're actually getting cooler.
Correct, and you can look at any number of things that suggest that state it clearly. Total solar irradiance is way down. We're in the maximum solar sunspot cycle, but it is way below the minimum that has ever been seen. It was half of what NASA thought it was going to be when we started this cycle, and the next cycle is going to be the lowest minimum ever, and it right now is already at the same level as the Maunder minimum, which caused nearly 100 years of cold between 1650 and 1750. But I think we're actually going into the little ice age level of stuff. So the Russians agree with that. The Russian scientists are saying we're at least could be 250 years in a cold cycle.
Wow. Okay. And how cold is that going to be? I mean, is it literally going to be an ice age, or is it just going to be temperatures are going to be globally down, but not necessarily going into an ice age?
Well, see, there's the rub. I mean, if you think of an ice age and the Earth becoming covered with glaciation, that is meaningless to humanity, because we'll die out long before the planet ever got that level. So a 3 or 5 degree temperature difference alters all our growing patterns completely. So, for instance, we can look at it this way. Right now, we're looking at a situation where, say, 2022, we may not be able to grow wheat north of Italy. 2027, we may not be able to grow wheat outside of a very, very narrow band around the equator. And we'll be trying to deal with food crops that will mostly, hopefully, be under glass and in controlled environments by that stage. But that's how it's going to be. Even though there's not ice over all of the northern hemisphere, it may be that temperature drop with the lowering of the solar irradiance, because we're also going to lose from between now and I think it's 2026, we'll lose about 1/8 of the sun that we're getting now, and it's reduced as it is. So plant will not be able to grow at specific areas that we've had them growing in. In fact, now we've got, there used to be, before the GMO stuff and before monoculture, there used to be forms of wheat that were takeoffs of spelt and some of these others that could grow north of 47 and 48 degree latitude. And now we're going to find that we'll be lucky to be able to get any of those kind of crops to grow north of the tropics. So we need to start looking at it as a species and start reacting to this. Additionally, we won't be able to do what people have in previous times, and that is to turn to the oceans as a source of food and protein, because they're so polluted now with all the radiation and the oil spill on the Gulf and all of this kind of thing. So we're going to be really hard pressed by the challenges that are ahead.
Now, just before we went live, I did mention to you that I watched the video with Dane Whittington, and he was concerned. He said, even if you only have the chemtrail issue, he said he gives us about 9 years. Now, with the animal die-offs happening, Fukushima, the pollution, and the issues that we have with the weather affecting crops, you said about yourself about 12 years. So it's not kind of looking good the way things are at the moment.
That's kind of the case. My 12-year figure, though, is if faction A had won. Okay, if the people that were intent on denying reality and trying to control the narrative rather than allow us to find out what reality wants us to see in the narrative, if they had existed, continued to go, we would not have we would have barely 12 years because we wouldn't adapt at all to what's coming up. Or so few of us would that there wouldn't be enough of a carry level to keep humanity going. We've all been occupied by a monster that lives on debt, and it will do everything it can to create yet more debt. And that's what these guys are doing, is they're finding yet another thing to layer debt upon. And so if they could figure out a way to do it, they would quite happily have debt-based, performance instruments against cow farts. It's quite absurd. And this is we've come to the point where the system is actually finally starting to crumble on its own. A good thing, but also a bad thing. As I say, a very challenging period that we face. But the women that we show in the Ireland pop here are not protesters per se. The data we get, I think, is focusing more on an effective solution involving gold that comes from what we're now terming the woke population. Around here, the millennials in my country, they don't refer to themselves as awake, like awake and aware. They refer to themselves as being woke. And, I woke up. And, this implies a lot. It doesn't mean you know what's going on, but it does mean that you're no longer accepting the, officially put out consensus paradigm and its limitations on your action. So it's a very powerful statement that's being made by these generations over here, and it's really starting to spread, and that's where I get my optimism. And I think it's also going to spread to your area because the data sets are suggesting that these women do something with a woke idea that involves gold that causes all kinds of consternation in the officialdom.
That's kind of very interesting, and let's bring it on, ladies. If you're out there, and they're involved in gold in some way, something came to mind. You were saying about the whole psychic thing and the Irish thing, and we've heard about this before, how important Ireland is in the big scheme of things, and I wouldn't put it past me if the ladies got all their kind of gold jewellery together. Now, go with me on this one, right, Steve? The ladies got all the gold jewellery together for funding, melted it down, sold it on, or whatever they needed to do for it, to raise funds for a party or a female party to take on the government. Maybe it's something like that. I don't know.
I suppose anything is possible. But I mean, you look at the past couple of years over here. I don't know if it's been the same in your area, Cliff, but over here, over the past, I'm going to say probably 10 years, that may be a little bit of a stretch, but we've had these kind of corner shops popping up, cash for gold, where everyone just wanted it. They wanted to buy your gold. They just wanted it, and they came, and I think they raped the people of definitely of Ireland anyway. All the old women, who were trying to pay bills and make ends meet, were going in with their old wedding rings, etc., and getting buttons for them, and it's all, no one actually knows we certainly don't know where all this gold is gone, or what the big rush was to get it. I don't know if it's the same over in the US.
Yeah, it was here. We had them on corners. They would wave these big placards. They would pay kids to stand out there, pay them a minimal wage per hour to stand out there and wave big placards that said, "We buy gold, we buy gold." Yeah. And that went through our area here until they'd basically gotten everybody who was willing to dishoard. And it's my understanding all of that is now in vaults in China. What occurred was about, let's say even 13, 15 years ago, the Chinese government recognized and even started making official proclamations within the party that the health and wealth of the party was directly tied to the health and wealth and economic well-being of the populace, and they needed to get the party behind making the populace diversify. And so they actually made it not only legal for the Chinese population to buy and trade in gold and silver, but they were starting to make commercials that were promoting that. And the reason that they did this was because these individuals knew precisely what would occur should the Chinese nation be caught unawares by a collapse of the dollar, since so much of the Chinese reserves and assets were backed, so to speak, by the debt-based instrument, the U.S. dollar. This global reserve currency idea is failing. Everybody in the West, you'll see repeatedly, especially even in the financial commentary in Ireland and the UK, in general, they'll say, well, China wants to be the new reserve currency and so on. And that's not true at all. China doesn't want their currency in this very nasty position that's required of the reserve currency. And China is of the opinion that when the dollar dies, that's it for reserve currencies. We're not going to have another reserve currency. There is no need for one, and it's entirely basically a war and profiteering model anyway, and nobody wants it at their level of the Chinese government to continue. And so that's what happened to all the gold, and it's still happening. Now, our data sets are saying it's going to get really interesting here over this next year, because there will be something similar to that, at least here in the U.S., where we'll have people trying desperately to get the population to dishoard silver. A very tricky proposition, because silver is not as easy to assay in its proof level, if you will, as gold. With gold, you can use various acids and touchstones and get a fairly good idea of the carat value. That's not the case in silver, so we're going to have all kinds of strange chaos here as they try and get us to dishoard silver. But I can tell your audience right now that there are no more ounces of silver above ground that have been mined than there are existent for gold. So the ratio in reality now is 1-to-1. And in the future, prices will reflect something very close to that same ratio. And this is something that they may want to hang on to that idea in the future here, that as the system becomes further unglued and the dollar dies, we will return to something other than paper currencies. And in the process, the true value of silver will have to come out because it has such a fantastic value to the species in its electrical capability that we will no longer use it for money. Our data sets have said, I don't know, maybe 7 to 10 years that we're going to reach a point in the early 2020s when silver would be too precious to use as money. And before getting there, it would reach a point of 1-to-1 parity in price as gold. Now, I would also argue that anybody involved in gold should take a real good look at Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the new digital form of gold, which is a form of money issued by individuals to themselves without a central bank involved. It's finite, it's limited, it's a deflationary currency that keeps growing in value and has some real interesting potential and profits in the future.
Yeah, it's something that we're going to have to get into. I think a lot of people are looking at Bitcoin. Now, obviously the concern we have is regarding the cabal and the whole idea that they want to get rid of paper money and have everything digital. And I think only 3% of physical money is actually in America. I don't know, probably globally as well. Everything else is digital. And if they take away the physical money, then they can manipulate and they can just go mad regarding the computer systems, as you know. And that would be my concern. The same with Bitcoin, that it's another form of digital currency. There's nothing physical.
That would be true, but there's something about Bitcoin that most people don't understand. And that is that while if a bank issues a digital currency, so I work mainly in digital U.S. dollars. I hardly ever see the paper part anymore. There's very little paper dollars in our country circulating. And so I'm comfortable with digital. I have no problem with digital currency because that's a communication. That's an exchange between two individuals. Where I have a problem is someone that controls that currency itself. And that's not possible with Bitcoin because Bitcoin is backed by everybody that's running a computer that's on the blockchain at that moment. And it can neither be hacked nor controlled. This is why it's causing governments fits. And Bitcoin over time, I'm also of the opinion we need to get away from cash, but we need to retain something that has its value, the values of cash, such as being anonymous, non-traceable, etc. And Bitcoin and its other cousins do have that capability, and we'll always have precious metals in the world we'll be going to in the future, which are ultimately non-trackable at those levels of exchanges. So even in our country now, we have states, Missouri and some of these others that have said, well, you can't have a cash transaction that is above this amount of actual physical dollars. And basically, it's the government desperate for funds. Why are they desperate for funds? It's because the money is crashing, because it's a debt-based system on a Ponzi scheme. The pyramid is as large as it can get, so it crumbles.
Yeah, and of course we've heard as well that when this bubble bursts, because we're using a fractional reserve system, which is going to crash, as you say, it's a Ponzi scheme, and they're not adding anybody else on the bottom of it to keep it going. We've heard that the first thing that, if it's going to go, it will be the derivatives market. Again, it's debt based, because they're just gambling on the future, and that when we see that going, then the whole thing will just crumble, apparently.
Correct, and I don't think you'll see that part of it. The derivatives will go. You won't hear about it. Maybe they'll go in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon. And then the next morning you wake up and the system has crashed. It'll be like that. It'll be that rapid.
Yeah, and people need to be aware of that regarding the banking, because we've seen in Greece where they did the bail-in. We know all the banks have signed up in Europe to the bail-in. They did that last year. They all signed up to the bail-in, and that happened in Cyprus, where they did the bail-in, and in Greece the banks closed for a week and people couldn't get the money out to get their medication and everything else. So it can happen, and it possibly might happen. And people have to think about that. If that happens, what are they going to do? How can they get the money? I know what you're saying about the Bitcoin. It's away from the actual system, away from the governments, and it's not like they can switch off your credit card, because Bitcoin is down to everybody that has a computer. It's like open source. But surely the fact it's still digital, they could bring in a government law that says, right, from now on, anybody who deals with Bitcoin has to be registered. You have to have a license to do it. You have to tell us what's in your bank account. We need access to it. Because if you remember, I'm sure you remember, Cliff, I think it was the 1930s in America, when we had the stock market crash, they brought in a law that everybody had to give in their gold.
Yes, but you have to be very careful about this, okay? Here's the thing. In the 1930s, very little gold was actually turned in. Very little was.
Okay.
Okay, and the reason it was because most people didn't have to. The reason that they could even try that in the 30s, and they can't do that now, was because that gold that was seized, that was actually turned in, was of two forms. It was gold held on deposit at a bank against a loan, or it was gold that there was an insurance paper written on, so they could figure out where it was. And so in that 3-week period of time, they went through thousands, tens of thousands, millions of safety deposit boxes and found all kinds of stuff other than gold, and ended up causing all kinds of problems and blackmailing people and so on. But they got very little gold, because those people that had the gold didn't keep it in that form in terms of bank loans. Digital currency, Bitcoin, the government can demand all they want, but basically if I don't tell them, they'll never know.
True. Okay, good point.
Okay, and I don't have to put Bitcoin into my dollar, if we're still dealing in dollars. I don't have to convert Bitcoin to dollars. I can do Bitcoin to Bitcoin transactions that are, just exchanges between people, or I could convert it to gold or whatever. And basically, it comes down to, if they won't know if I don't tell them.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. We have a lot of questions come in now. I do. Maybe what we do is the last thing on your list. I suppose we're going to have to give it a mention, because people will be interested to find out what the trending is, or what the WebBot predictions are regarding the whole ET alien thing that's being said, and obviously the big D, the big disclosure, which we keep hearing all the time. What is trending on that? what's your WebBot program saying about it?
Well, the data we're getting now for the rest of the year is going to be really, it's really cool for me. I mean, it reads like science fiction. But we're going to get to a point here where the Faction A and Faction B within the deep state are going to be embroiled in a deeper level of conflict over summer, and we're going to start getting disclosure as a tactic, as a weapon, if you will, one faction against another. And so the populace will be treated to all kinds of information that we know to be factual because of the way that it'll be coming on out, that will expose a lot of the space alien stuff. And on top of that, there's some stuff that's focusing on the idea that one of the factions, the Faction A, the group that wants to control us all and believe in global warming is caused by driving vehicles and so on, that group is going to try and limit it to Antarctica. and they're going to say that all this stuff that's coming out and so on is all derived from the discovery, which I'm putting all that in capitals, the discovery that's coming out of Antarctica. The reason I'm putting it all in capitals is because our data sets are saying that it's going to take humanity at least the next 100 years to just digest everything we're going to find there in terms of knowledge. And so it will take us that long to throw out unlearn everything we've been told by all of our authorities and officialdom, because it's all bogus and it's all lies. And then it'll take us 100+ years to come to a new understanding of what the reality is of human history, the history of Earth and other races on the Earth, including space aliens, and all this really cool technology and stuff. Now, this, as I say repeatedly in interviews, this might all be fantasy. It might just be, my picking up movie plots and stuff in my software. Except we have real-world manifestations of this stuff. If you'll look, there are places where right now, and I've got it floating on my Clif High Twitter feed timeline over there, but there's a link to Milwaukee, city in the United States. Milwaukee has a jobs center going that has 151 jobs listed for Antarctica. There's corporations around here where we've been able to locate nearly 900 jobs that are currently open in Antarctica. If you get on Google Earth and go down to Antarctica in the view and just start crawling around at a decent level of resolution around the coastline, you see tens of thousands of people in habitations that you didn't know existed there, with airports that shouldn't exist there, with helipads that shouldn't exist there, with big loading facilities for container ships that shouldn't exist there, and on and on and on. And so there is support for the idea that there is already a giant investment by our species in Antarctica at a level that is simply not discussed in the mainstream media. And our data sets are saying that a lot of this stuff is going to come out over this year, and we will all be staggered by what we learn. So, for instance, one of the things we're going to learn is that the ice on Antarctica is not 3 million years old. Ergo, all of the ice core samples that say we're going into global warming are absolutely BS. If the ice is only 8 or 9 or 10 or 12,000 years old, then all the suppositions we've made about that are scary, and they're scary wrong, because we've been thinking it takes millions of years, and it might only take 2 or 3 years to get seriously big glaciers to build. And some really shocking stuff coming out. But what really is going to get us going is the technology that we'll discover there.
Well, look, this is one of the things that myself and Steve have been talking about. We have a thing we call the fluid belief system, and it's about having your belief system fluid. So when new information comes in that challenges what you believe, you can just change, and there's no big deal. The people who are stuck in a belief system, their world's going to fall apart, because they have such a staunch belief in what they believe in, whatever they may be. It could be religion, whatever, politics. That when this information comes out, this is why I think some people nowadays are losing the plot, because there's information coming out and they're just saying, I don't believe it. And a lot of people I've spoken to have said they've noticed this kind of, we know this, we hear about this energy that's changing on the planet. The human frequency is actually vibrating on a higher frequency, and it's obviously affecting some people in their own way. But this kind of, it's affecting people in a way that things are happening, and you just think, why are people doing this? Why is this going on? There must be a reason for it. And we put it down to, obviously, new information coming out, plus certain energy changes as well. That's what the information we're getting.
You're correct about that. The energy issue is key, too, as well, because, see, here's what's going on, and this is why we're going into an ice age. There's actually multiple different reasons we're going into an ice age. One of them has to do with Saturn and Jupiter usually are opposite each other in their relative orbits, so they're opposite Earth all the time. Now they're shading together a little bit closer to each other in this 420-year cycle, and so in so doing, they pull our orbit slightly out of circular pattern, and thus we're further away from the sun, thus we're going to lose a little bit of irradiation, and thus we're going into a cooling period. Now, on top of that, something really interesting is happening with the sun. The sun itself is weakening. It's going from 5,000 plus degrees Kelvin, seems to be heading down to what they call the base operating temperature for suns, which is about 3,000 degrees Kelvin. Now, in doing so, It's not a nuclear reactor. The sun is not consuming vast levels of hydrogen in a nuclear fusion or any of that. We don't know what the sun is composed of. We have no idea. It may be a solid surface. It's quite cold. And what happens is it's going through interstellar space, which is not a vacuum. And in the process of that, this flow comes around it. That flow is what causes the light and the heat and everything we see off of the sun in the form of basically a very large electrical plasma. Now, in, let's say, normal times of the previous few centuries, previous few millennia, the sun's light and its arc, the plasma and everything around there, was very robust and very brilliant. And we were in a yellow, in fact, if we go back far enough, even a staggeringly yellow sun. And so when that was going on, that plasma arc actually alters the energies that are flowing around the sun. And so when they flow around the sun, like you go and you see these movies of airplanes, they stick in those little wind tunnels and they put smoke around it so they can see the air flowing around the wing surface. That's very much what we're looking at here with the flow around the sun. But as the sun weakens and the plasma is no longer so strong, much more of that energy comes into us. This causes such things as cosmic rays to come in greater quantity, but also all of these unknown energies that, as you note, are affecting humans.
Yeah, it's we're seeing that big time, but we have loads of questions for you, so we better get over to and go through the questions. Steve, over to you.
Okay, where are we going to start? We're going to start off with a message, Cliff, from Scott and Maureen. And Scott and Maureen say, we want to thank you for coming onto the show and for the amazing work you are doing. We are relatively new to the Alta report and would like to recommend it as an amazing month-long read reference tool and is great value. That's from Scott and Maureen, and they've also sent us in some questions which they want us to ask, so I'm going to just dive straight in. And
well, thank them very much, but go right ahead.
I think you already have. They say, it would be interesting to know, with so much language, particularly in fake media, about Russia, why there is no mention of Russia Pop in Jan and Feb report, and a little island like Ireland, which we are very happy about, has land pop.
There's a couple of things. First, you have to understand that Russian is a very interesting language, but there's these issues relating to what are called the verbs of motion. Those verbs of motion in English and other languages are some of our key level words. And so I'm very careful with my Russian in our work because I can so easily get it wrong. So I'm very hesitant about that usually. But also, haven't had time to put a lot of stuff from Russia in there simply because of the ongoing battles between Faction A and Faction B. And that's likely to continue for some time within our data sets because we're still embroiled in that. Nothing is 100% settled at the moment. There's been a major victory by Faction B. They're doing some consolidation in the United States in terms of their power, but it's still ongoing in Europe and throughout other parts of the planet, including India. So I suspect we'll be in that state for some time of so much information I just can't get it all out.
Okay, and is there a global significance, they want to know, to Ireland, to Ireland Pop? They say, referring to Michael Tsarian's work, etc.
I love Michael Tsarian. There is a global significance. I don't know what it is. I just know that it exists based on the amazingly small percentage of the population, yet the statistically anomalous amount of words that I get about Ireland. Now, this might be referenced, and you could say, well, there's so many of the Irish have left, there's so many expats and Irish-leaning descendants that may cause it, and that might indeed be the case, but I don't see that with Chinese or other large immigrating populations. So there's something unique about the Irish, and I also have been able to eliminate it as being an English-only issue.
Okay, so we're special in some way.
But we don't know why.
we don't even know why.
Didn't your mummy say that years ago? You're
My
very
mummy,
special.
she did.
Yeah. Well, we have some cool stuff for you guys, though, real quick here. I mean, in the future, there's going to be some kind of a giant thing that they're going to call the slope. And I at this point, I think it's going to be a way of making energy off of the difference in water temperature off the western side of Ireland, because the reference is that Ireland will be feeding energy in the form of electricity over to Europe.
That's interesting.
That's interesting. Okay, such a small country providing that power.
Well, that's of course all going to come from the wind farms that seem to be popping up left, right, and centre.
Yeah, we better not go down that road. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, this is actually, one more diversion.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's links in that data set to China. And so a friend of mine in China who's really savvy to what's going on there said, oh, look, it's probably this. And the Chinese have developed this way of sticking pipes way deep into the ocean and basically making a giant heat pump instead of making heat. It takes electricity and has a further benefit of bringing up extremely cold water for aquaculture.
Okay, that's going to be interesting.
Okay, we'll keep an eye out for that. The second question from Scott and Maureen, they want to know, Cliff, can you share with the audience some advice? I'm going to pronounce this one wrong, I know I am. But can you share with the audience some advice on Ayurvedic,
Sure.
TCM, natural health, fulvic, humid, mega hydrate, etc. tools for protection?
Sure. You got to watch out for the mega hydrate. There's a couple of people that are putting out various products to cause this to occur. Some of them can have deleterious effects on you. The idea of mega hydrate is to make your blood slippery so that the platelets don't clump together, and it has to do with how much water you're ingesting. The idea is that in a chemtrail environment with the aluminum, barium, cesium, and all these other chemicals up there being put down, that it's actually making us dehydrated continuously. That our diet doesn't help, the electromagnetic radiation we're in doesn't help, and so on. And so you need to compensate. And I agree with the idea of compensating, but I go through the structured water rather than through the chemical approach. But the Ayurveda is Ayur meaning life, and Veda meaning truth, or truth about life. It's a Hindu form of medicine, or it's a form of medicine that originated in the area between the Himalayan mountains and the Indian Ocean, which we call the Hind or Hindu now. And this is at least 6,000 years old. It is evidence-based medicine, so it's not a theory, and then we try and make a projection off that theory and see if we can prove it and create a drug to deal with it. This is stuff that's been working for 6,000 or 7,000 years. Now, here's the interesting woo-woo part of this. Some of our information coming out of Antarctica is suggesting that the knowledge coming out of there is going to make humans re-examine our relationship with our entire view of, let's call it, the healthcare industry over these next few years, and in fact, a very short period of time. So in total, the data sets are suggesting that from now through to 2022, there will be as many changes insofar as the impact on us personally as we've seen maybe in the last 150 years. It'll be coming out that rapidly. I know that this is the case now, that indeed these projections being made by the data that I'm getting and interpreting out of the data are going to be accurate because I'm able to see stuff in reality, such as the advent of the quantum computers and a number of different items that are being pushed into our social order at the fringe, which would be the industrial side of things. So in other words, recently in the past, say, 4 or 5 months, I've done some investigation and have found about half a dozen really interesting devices that are coming into creation now with no fanfare, and they should be touted, and everybody should just be paying attention to them. And I think what's going on is that they're being introduced into society the same way the transistor was introduced after the 1947 crash in Roswell.
Can you maybe give us an idea?
Sure.
Something that
some of these are one of the devices allows you to custom create the little tiny plastic, I guess you'd call it wire or thread that they put through 3D printers. Okay, so imagine being able to control the formulation at a molecular level and decide that within this particular plastic thread for this particular length of time, you wanted this particular metal because it allowed transmission of electricity at this particular level. It would allow you to 3D fabricate complex electrically carrying devices as easily as you would 3D print a small doll.
Okay, well, I'm guessing obviously that's stuff that's going to be only available to the big corporations and those who can afford it. I mean,
see, there's the rub. Let's back up a second. Let's talk about Catherine Austin Fitts here for a moment. Okay, she's this person that was worked under senior George Bush in that administration. She was Assistant Secretary of Housing for the United States, ran one of the largest organizations within the U.S. federal government, knows money inside and out, had the federal government try and kill her repeatedly. She was an enemy of the state because she spoke the truth, and she's a good being all the way around, and she's got some really smart. She's got some observations here that are pertinent. One of these observations is that what we're actually looking at is the battle between two factions. Faction A wanted to keep empire and sacrifice the United States. Faction B is willing to sacrifice empire in order to keep the United States, and they won. Now, Faction B also represents those people that want to push out distributed technology. These people, I think, are reacting to the Ice Age meme that's coming to us, and they're getting away from centralization. So the very point of this technology is that it doesn't go to just big corporations, and that pretty soon anybody will have it. So, for instance, I know that I could go right now in my little tiny town here and purchase a 3D printer, and I can start fabricating right off. I know all kinds of people that are doing the 3D printing stuff, and I also know that it's open source. And so it's growing through this combinoric grassroots kind of an effort where I do something cool, you riff off of my coolness and invent your own, I get back and I take your idea and fold it into something else and so on, and it just grows. And that's what we're after now. That's what I think the ultimate deep state faction B is after, is that combinoric influence that you don't get with corporations. What they're after is what gives Bitcoin its value, the network effect of all of us focusing our attention willingly, wantingly, and desiringly on that subject.
Well, it's funny, I'll just add to that, and you'll probably, it's similar to what you said about the 3D. Myself and Steve are getting the Arduino, and you've heard of the Arduino. We're going to be building various projects. There's a couple of projects that we want to do, and we're going to be getting Arduino. And that's the generic open source platform that people can buy, and they're swapping plans, and they're making getting somebody's idea and then enhancing that, and then maybe they'll get it and enhance it again. And this open source platform seems to be growing in a number of areas, not just in technology.
Yes, and actually, I have Arduino. I've been monkeying about with that for some time. I've got my C programming for Arduino book here. I'm going to make a little Arduino program that will control the very specialized lights I need on my proa sailboat, because a proa has two bows. It doesn't have a stern. It doesn't tack. It shunts. And so each bow is a bow in turn. And when you do that, you've got to turn your navigation lights exactly opposite of what they were. And so I was going to do all that with Arduino. Very simple. It's really cool stuff, guys.
Yeah, no, we're looking forward to getting into it. Steve, you got more questions there for Clif?
Yeah, we do. The final question we have from Scott and Maureen is, Clif, do you have an opinion on organic sulfur? And then in brackets it says MSM from natural source.
I
don't go the okay, well, how do I want to say this? They have the right, mainstream media has the right to perform as they are and be as they are, but they're actually, what we're looking at with the corporations and all of this is the faction A versus faction B. So my opinion at the moment is, and it seems to be spreading out from the center of empire here, is that the faction B winning is going to bust up corporation media in a way that we've not seen in my lifetime. So I've existed in our culture here with corporation media telling me what all the thoughts should be, and it'll go away within these next few years.
Well, it's happening now with the alt media. I mean, it really is. People are beginning to switch off big time on the mainstream media, especially with the fact that what Trump is saying and coming out and saying about the fake news and actually making it, we've been saying this for years, as I'm sure you have, but now you have somebody like Trump coming out and pointing it out and saying it in public. It's fantastic, and people are now switching off the mainstream news and saying, I don't want to listen to them. All the figures, the newspapers aren't selling, people are switching off the TV stations because they now know it's all controlled propaganda. And we've seen a massive increase in our audience organically over the last couple of years because people want to hear the truth or want to hear at least what's going on, what's the alternative, and we've seen that happen big time.
Exactly, and they actually don't want to hear the truth. They want to hear the facts and then make up their own mind as to what is true and what is not. Around here, that was eulogy for the legacy media is that they tried to tell us the truth. Now, my dad from Missouri, he had a saying, you can't tell people shite. Okay.
Yeah.
And he says and he says you got to be careful about it because it's like teaching a pig to sing. It won't work, and you're just going to annoy the pig.
Right, okay, well that's fair enough. Yeah, exactly. Not so much the truth, but get people on, let them hear what they have to say, and then people can decide whether that resonates with them, and they can make up their own mind, rather than have funneled propaganda, which is controlled, and it's there for a reason, using certain psychological methods to try and people to believe. They have, I forget the name of it now, but they have certain methods where they actually control the information, and we call it NLP being one of them.
Sure, actually it's gone electronic. Over here it's called entrainment technology, or ET.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean extraterrestrial, it means entrainment technology, and they take alpha waves and piggyback them in on the carrier signals on the 1080i, and then they can put anything in there that they want, and you will accept it. Now, you won't necessarily believe it, but you'll accept it as being factual and true and so on until something forces you to confront that and ask yourself, no, wait a second, why am I thinking this? So, it's just an interesting kind of an effect. But this is why we call the situation now in the U.S. here as being woke. And so everybody says Trump is our first woke president. And, the other presidents may indeed have known everything that was going on, but they sure weren't of a mind to share it with any of us. And this is the big difference that we have here, is that Faction B, I think, actually doesn't care what we know. And I actually think Faction B is of the opinion that things are so dire for humanity, we can't afford these illusions anymore, and we've got to get real serious about where we're at. Like Dane was saying, about the forests and so on not thriving, even though we've got the rains. That'll probably all change if we can get them to stop the chemtrails. But even stopping the chemtrails is going to have its own impact on us as the planet reacts to that shock. When I was a kid, the sun was yellow and mellow, as I used to think of it. I could go out and go surfing for hours. And yeah, I'd get a sunburn the first day maybe. And then, 18, 20 hours into it, I didn't even notice after that I'd ever had any impact. This is not the case anymore. We're in a white sun. It's very much harsh. It feels on the body as though 93 degrees when it's 73. Those kind of trends are likely to increase as we go forward because of the new energies that are coming around the sun and that we'll all experience. And I think we just need to face this in an awake or awoke fashion and say, yes, basically something's going on here. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I'm willing to look at it, and I don't need the blinders that someone else is trying to put on me. Yeah,
fair enough. I totally agree with that. Steve, you got more questions there?
We do have a lot more questions. Where to start from? A comment from Chris. Chris said earlier, interesting that Clif is looking at the world from a non-spiritual angle, but coming up with the same conclusion. There is a non-human element pulling the strings, he says. And a question from Joan. Joan says, what does Clif think about hemp crop for future use? It was used on the outskirts after Chernobyl. It was used for cleaning up the soil.
It's a fantastic product, especially if you can get the old-style industrial hemp, and it locks the radiation up, and even beyond that, it's not like seaweed, where if you take seaweed, and there have been experiments up here, it exposes it to radiation, it picks it up, and then you destroy the seaweed, you still have all the radiation. For some reason, hemp actually managed to destroy some of the radiation in the process of absorbing the material, so I think it's really cool for that. It's good stuff. We need it for rope and all these other materials, but and actually probably hemp will come back as a result of the Ice Age, because it was a favored rope source because the plant is so hardy.
Okay, so 2 thumbs up for hemp. Where next? Yeah, we had a question from one of the listeners on the People's Internet Radio chat room, and he said, Cliff said, when you're speaking about silver and the gold, he said, Cliff said silver would far exceed gold in worth last year. It never happened. Why?
No, I wasn't saying it was going to happen last year. It will yet.
No, he said you said this last year.
Well, it would be only a prediction. It doesn't mean it's going to happen.
No, and see, there's the thing. I mean, I think they're actually taking that out of context, because I would never have made the statement that within this period of time, silver was going to exceed gold in its value. because I'm very tight on that because we have so seldom get numbers. Right at the moment here in the United States, we have Dow, our Dow Industrial Average over 20,000. Silver is about $18. The last time we had this, or the very first time the number of 20,000 Dow showed up was perhaps 2002 in my data. I spoke about it in 2003 on the radio, and at that time I said silver would be about $600 an ounce. Because it showed up in our data sets that being it was temporally coincident with the Dow being at 20,000. And now I got everybody thought that was quite humorous back then for a decade, and I received all kinds of abuse about it. But here we are with Dow at 20,000, and it's my contention that if it was unmanipulated, silver should be at least $600. Now I think it should probably be well over 1,000, but it should not be equal to gold. It will become so as we go into the 2020s, though. So I may have last year said that silver was going to be more valuable than gold. And they may have thought I meant within that year, but that was not the case. We've known about the 2022 crossover. In the early 2020s, assuming that the data is accurate here and we're on these sets that still play out, we're going to get to the point where silver will become extremely valuable in the production of what we can think of as like anti-gravity technology. And it has to do with certain properties of silver independent of its ability to carry an electrical charge that are not replicated in other electrical metals like copper. I don't know the details. I don't know why or how they're going to use it. There's just the data we have. Now, that would suggest at that point that we've passed parity, though, because basically the data is describing a situation where the manufacturers are willing to pay whatever you ask for your ounce of silver. It's immaterial because the results of using that silver would be so fantastically productive.
Okay, so what you actually said when you said it was kind of more of a long-term prediction as
Correct.
opposed to a short-term. Just very quickly, in relation to silver, just thought I'd throw this one in. We may as well get your opinion. Colloidal silver or nano silver, have you heard of or used any of those?
Sure, I've used colloidal silver. It's good stuff. You have to bear in mind a couple of things. It can't turn you blue. Only people with specific genetics that can be triggered can actually turn slightly bluish in their skin, no matter how much you take up. But also, do not assume that colloidal silver circulates in the blood and kills bacteria and stuff. It doesn't work that way. A lot of the colloidal silver is absorbed by the gut. A lot of it kills your good gut bacteria, as much as you might like to think otherwise. And very little of it actually gets into the blood. It's much more effective as a topical and not an internal agent. But there you can't beat it. Topically, it kills, so much of the microvitum that it is the go-to antibiotic at that level.
Okay,
or
good to know.
Antiseptic, because it's not anti-life, but as an antiseptic, yes.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to get your take on that one. Where to next? When you spoke about Bitcoin, Karen Quinn Tostado over there in Oregon, Karen says, with Bitcoin, you have to be online to use it. That's an issue. And she also says it's been compromised at least 5 times in 2 years. Have you heard of that?
That's not true that Bitcoin has ever been compromised. The blockchain has never, ever been compromised. You do have to be online, at least to the extent of interacting with another machine next to you. And I'm not saying that in any way that Bitcoin is proof and a good hold for value if the electrical system planet-wide goes down. Obviously, if the internet doesn't work, Bitcoin is going to be very challenging to get any value out of. That's not my point. My point in saying buy Bitcoin is that I'm betting on the future. I'm betting that we'll be able to pull out of this in 12 years. And my supposition is that if we do pull out of this in 12 years and we have our social order going and so on, Bitcoin is going to be a huge key element in it and will be worth a lot more then than it is now because a lot of the paper currencies will have died. If we don't make it, no amount of silver or gold is going to assist you. In an ice age, silver and gold are useless. They're not going to be able to be transported and be effective as a store of wealth. So it's kind of like, well, that's a good idea that these are good stores of value, but they're not good currencies in the modern world. They're not good money in the modern world. They lack that ability to be easily transported and so on. And I'm assuming my smartphone is going to continue operating. There's going to be cell towers and all of this as we go forward, and that we're going to get more rational about what we're doing electronically. But I think that is the future still. And if it's not, then we are indeed looking at an extinction, and then it doesn't matter if you've got Bitcoin or not.
Well, that's true. And one of the listeners on PIR went on to say that obviously it's one of the downsides of Bitcoin, but if you have someone coming to your home, like doing some odd jobs, say cleaning the windows or mowing the lawn, you can't really pay them in Bitcoin.
Sure, yeah, you do. I do that kind of transaction all the time. I keep a little bit of Bitcoin on my phone, aim it at their phone, and zap, there you go.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, there's apps for that, guy.
Okay, I've learned something today. Okay.
Well, in Japan, they've accepted Bitcoin now as legal tender. The reason they wanted to do that is because it was so much more efficient than the process they had to go through to allow you to purchase out of their vending machines with the phones. They have this system over there. They've had it with a smartphone 4 or 5 generation for a number of years, maybe a decade now, where everybody in Japan can buy stuff out of all kinds of devices using their phones. The problem is that they reached a combinoric level where the processing on that was taking so long that the girl would go and stand and try and get some soup for lunch at the school vending machine, but the processing was taking a long time to get it to clear. And so they ran into just a big bog down on their capabilities. And so one of the things that they were thinking of doing was to shunt off some of the larger purchases over into Bitcoin world by allowing that to be legal tender and take the pressure off their existing system. So they've got these proximity phones that do this kind of a swap. And I know that there's a guy in Iceland right now that's getting ready to bring out a really spectacular version of that for that particular country.
How is that going to work regarding the likes of, number one, implementing Bitcoin and people using Bitcoin bypasses the banking system and central banking system. And we have the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. They're obviously not going to be happy about that. And number two of that is that what if it is if people want to give a loan of somebody, usury, we don't want to fall back into the whole monetary system again, fractional reserve banking. Now, I know there's a finite amount of Bitcoins out there, but have you come across anybody who was giving out loans of Bitcoin, and in what way are they doing it if you have come across them?
Sure, I've come across it in a couple of different formats. I even thought to make my own software when I originally started. Within the Bitcoin blockchain, there's this little space you can hang your other software on. And some of these softwares would allow you, like Ethereum and Ripple are two that I'm thinking about. These are platforms that are built on the blockchain, very much the way that email is built on the backbone of the Internet. And so it's very analogous. And so these new forms of this would allow you to take a Bitcoin in the Ethereum model that I'm familiar with, put it into what they call a contract, which is just an agreement between two people. The Bitcoin then goes on into the contract, is transferred by you into that Ethereum contract, and then it comes back to you when the conditions of that contract have been met. And thus, in the sense of being paid back your loan of a Bitcoin. And so that part of it is all automatic. You can do it across the planet. There's still the issue of if they don't pay you back, what do you do? So you have to build that kind of stuff into the contract as you go along. But they're there and operating now.
But what about
in many different jurisdictions? It's legal.
Okay, what about usury? I mean, surely somebody's going to say, well, I'm not going to do this for nothing. I have to get paid in some way.
Sure, but at this point, here's your issue. Once you're on the Ethereum platform, it's competition. So if you've got someone saying that I want a decibit, a tenth of a Bitcoin for doing this loan, then you could just open up your contract and see if anybody wants to bid on it lower. And you're going to get all kinds of people that would bid on it and say, sure, I'll take a quarter of a decibit, or I'll take a millibit. You're not much of a risk. I'll take only a millibit. And that's why we get true price discovery and true risk analysis discovery.
Okay, so it's actually going to be, well, I know it's digital, but it's going to be real. It's not going to be fractional, because usury is the bane of our fractional reserve system at the moment.
The fractional component dies, right? You can't really do that with Bitcoin.
Good. Okay, that's really what I'm getting at there. Right, Steve.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just actually reading a lot of information there on Wikipedia in relation to Bitcoin. It's very, very informative. Where are we? We're back to the Antarctic now, and from one of our People's Internet Radio listeners, he wants to know, isn't Antarctica supposedly guarded by a massive fleet of military ships?
Not that I'm aware of, and you don't see them on Google Earth and this kind of thing. It may be being guarded. If that's the case, nobody ever sees them. because there's tourists down there. And in fact, I mean, even in 2001, when I first started talking about Antarctica, because I was quite puzzled that it showed up in my data sets out of the blue, this guy he was in Spain at the time, sent me some photographs, and he was out on a hike, an approved, sanctioned hike in the British territory down there in Antarctica, and they wandered off the trail and saw a pyramid, and he took some pictures of this pyramid and had them developed in Spain and sent me a couple of copies after hearing me on the radio talking about it. And he said, this is what they're trying to protect. And he said that when it was discovered that these guys were off of their assigned hiking path, they were, summarily swooped up by British special forces in helicopters and summarily kicked off the continent and told, don't ever come back, you're banned. So even then, even in 2001, there was enough of a presence there that this was going on with tourists. And so now you see all kinds of tourist vessels go there from, not all kinds, but I mean, it's not like cruise ships.
Yeah. But
small little cruises are allowed. People do go there for this sort of thing. They're opening it up. Here's part of their problem. Antarctica is melting. There's what's known as the Central Antarctic Mountain Range or Ridge that separates the two halves of Antarctica. If you want to look at it, it's really one side is perhaps 2/3 of the continent. In any event, the ice on the smaller side is all breaking loose. That's where this giant iceberg is going to come from now. All of that's melting because of underground activity from the volcanoes. It's really accelerating. And that acceleration in volcanic activity, by the way, is the result of Jupiter and Saturn becoming slightly closer together and hauling us off of our orbit and slightly distending the Earth and causing the volcanoes to get all whipped up because there's magma flowing. And so all this makes sense relative to, known kind of stuff. We don't have to postulate the existence of a mythical Nibiru or any of that kind of thing, right? And also here's something else. If Nibiru is within 18 years of transiting our sun, there will be lightning bolts. So if you see a lightning bolt go out of the sun and head into the far distance of the solar system, then yes, there is a Nibiru and it's 18 years out. That's the calculation on the electrical field. But anyway, Antarctica is shedding all of the ice on that one side. Those pyramids are becoming revealed. All kinds of structures are coming revealed. We're seeing openings to underground structures of some unknown size and so on. I'm not privy to that. I have some hints from my data, but I don't have any factual knowledge about what they've actually found. But it is coming out, and it's coming out to the point now that corporations are really going on a hiring binge for people down in Antarctica. And here's something that most individuals don't understand. Usually when they would hire for Antarctica, they would hire in our summertime for the next season. Okay, for the next summer in Antarctica. So they would hire someone, get them into the system in that particular company, get them all their gear and everything over the course of, say, June, July, August, and September, and then get ready to send them down to Antarctica in November, December, and January. Then you would see all of the jobs dry up until the next summer when they had to outfit the next cadre. That's no longer going on. These people are hiring 365, 24/7, for some major buildup down there, and this one little paper in Milwaukee had 151 jobs.
Wow,
very unusual.
There obviously seems to be a lot going on down there. What you were saying about the actual air changes on the heating up and the issues going on with the sun, you wouldn't be referring to the pole shift by any chance, would you?
No. There's no such thing as a pole shift. Okay. They say that there's been a magnetic pole shift, and that's not true. That's Hapgood. We got some good thinkers over there out of the past here. We've got Charles Hancock. We've got even going all the way back to Darwin. Some people that could really think well, but not everybody had all of the facts. And so when the people were suggesting that there had been a pole shift, first a magnetic pole shift, and then second, a crustal pole shift. They were looking at existing evidence here without a large enough theory to accommodate it. So the evidence that they see for a magnetic pole shift is the swapping back and forth of the magnetic alignment of various different strata within the planet, and that were frozen at the time of volcanoes and so on. So they said, here's all this magnetic material. It's all pointing this direction. It got hardened. So at that time, the North Pole was over there. That's not accurate, because the plasma that is actually generating the magnetic field of the Earth deep inside our core, deep inside the core of the Earth, is not rotating molten metal. It's a giant nuclear plasma, electrical plasma. This thing creates vast quantities of magnetism, and it fluctuates back and forth frequently, nearly continuously. It's jerking around. It's not it's very erratic and energetic. It's very much unlike a spinning mass of metal. And so it creates erratic magnetic fields that reach far out into space. And so it's quite easily done that it can cause all the magnetic alignments to occur within various strata of rock and material that then freeze up to leave us evidence. And that's not sure and certain proof that the magnetic field was in any way, shape, or form what they think it is.